So this is Through the Lens of Scorpio, what comes after cynicism, and addressing soul space as a potential remedy for the emotion of cynicism. And I say remedy just because cynicism is kind of taken as a given sometimes when it's really just a critical moment where something can change. An image for Scorpio that I'd like to start out with is lifting up a rock and seeing all the insects that come running out. This is one of the most visceral memories from my early childhood as I lifted up rocks in my grandmother's garden, curious about what I might find. Each time a different variety of pincher bugs, spiders, and worms. It might take a scorpionic type to be fascinated by this image. Insects are closely related to the Scorpio archetype, as they have protective exoskeletons and a kind of primordial mystique in having been on the planet long before us. And I bring this up to relate to the very basic fear that is at the threshold of examining what is underneath our reality, our basic aversion to the animal beings that shamanically represent the forces of transmutation. And as with these below the surface worlds of our lives, we can be afraid of the underlayers and undercurrents and prefer not to address them. But the undercurrents, like lava within a volcano, are destined to influence the surface world and at times to erupt directly, cataclysmically into the surface world and to interrupt appearances there. So why not engage our realities, the undercurrents of our realities at deeper levels if it is destined to manifest at the top? The experience of feeling cynicism or jadedness about whatever it is, ourselves, our relationships, our government, the universe itself, is just one stop along a greater mythic arc. And it can be a treacherous stop because without the perspective on what's happening from a mythic perspective, it's really easy for a soul to get stuck in a groove of cynicism and think that that's all that there is. In many ways, the unconscious does this all the time. Think about, even though this isn't something that we attach emotion to, like a pile of clothes in the corner of your eye, and it's the same color as your dog, so you think it's your dog until you turn around and see it's just a pile of clothes. There's a lot of facets of our lives that we see in this way of ingrained and perceptual routine. And in Scorpio, it's specifically our discontent and our dissatisfaction with what is that lends us to become conscious of a prior blind spot that's operating within consciousness that is now ready to change and become more deeply self-aware. And cynicism is when we see something that we once believed in or had hope in has died. And without knowing that death implies a rebirth, we think something bad has happened, and that's just the way it is and the way it will always be. Cynicism is an analysis of what is flawed about what has happened or what is, without engaging the imagination or faith-oriented consciousness about what could be or what will be. And as long as we think that what we don't like just is, that it's not the cutting edge of change, we can be really shut down and be afraid to look at it. It hurts too much. So we look away, like this guy who's wanting to avoid falling into a bottomless pit of despair. So what happens when we address our fears and our discomfort with where we're at, our disgust even with our circumstances, as a symbol of change that is actually unfolding, rather than a static, stuck reality that we just have to cope with? And I want to argue that in the times ahead that we're facing as a globe, it's important for as many souls as possible to wake up to the nature that they are a soul, that they're something beyond the surface appearances, that at the base of their being, they have more power than the surface world will tell them that they do. We don't just need action to mitigate what's happening on the surface world to meet the problems of today or even the problems of our own lives. we need more and more people radically in touch with the essence of their being. It's from this space that we create the most potent change. And it's from this space that we are more tapped into intuitive faculties that let us know what to do on the surface world to align with the intentions of our deeper nature. And for a little bit of background info before I return to cynicism as a process of the Scorpio archetype, the soul, as represented by Scorpio, is naturally square to the Aquarius archetype, which represents the collective consciousness. And when we're in touch with our soul energy, we intrinsically have the capacity to psychically communicate with other souls, as well as for our simple presence or existence within that soul space to really alter the collective without any additional effort on our part. It's like one cell within the organism of humanity waking up and transmitting messages, as we all have the ability to. So whenever we think that something on the outside is demanding our attention and that interior gazing is somehow frivolous, I say that it's from this space of interior knowing that we know how to act on the outside world in a way that really affects deep change. And very simply, when we don't like what we see on the outside, we don't like the way the world is headed, we begin to get to know ourselves. We catalyze and alchemize the solution within, and then we offer it to the world outside of us. And this doesn't have to be linear, it definitely goes back and forth. And I liken the process of being stuck or jaded or cynical about anything to being inside a cave where one thinks that they're looking at the horizon, but they're really just looking at a wall. So this picture came up on Tumblr when I was looking for images for this talk. And I see this kind of like dead bee kind of transformative aspect. We're in a cave and our person thing here is wearing oven mitts, and the Taurus polarity to Scorpio is also an archetype where we can get really stuck and in some kind of rut. So I see this as kind of a shadow of the Taurus Scorpio polarity. Not really sure where to go here in this picture. And to get unstuck and unjaded, to feel really in love with life or in touch with infinite possibility, the question of what do we think the nature of the universe is can come up. I think that Scorpio can traverse just as far as it believes it can. And so we have to ask ourselves, what do I believe the universe is? What do I believe my role is within it? And to really get beneath the roots and touch root with that space, this means we question and actively assess all the forms of social conditioning and personal conditioning that dictates what's true for us from an outside perspective, what's true on the inside. And we see this in religion, we see this in a lot of science, we see this in doctors that abuse their authority, and teachings and dogmas where authority is unquestioned, and there's not consent for this power differential. We're not just going to change this paradigm of routine disempowerment on the surface and all the ways that that is manifested by enacting litigation or electing more suitable leaders. We're going to change that paradigm by waking up to who we are en masse. And we can meet our own experiences of cynicism and add the transformative lens by activating certain qualities. One is recognizing when a belief or a thought about how our reality works just feels bad. The emotion of it feeling bad is a message. It's not something that we have to take as a given. Questioning the underlying reasons that this thought or belief exists. And this is really complicated. That's why I'm into Pluto. There's a lot of complexity around why we do the things we do. And then beginning to open up to the possibility that there is something else beyond that limitation. inviting higher consciousness, our higher self, God, to assist us in finding the answer within, or by meeting it in our environment. This is an extraordinarily vulnerable thing to do. It removes the protective exoskeleton hiding us from hurt or disappointment and exposes us to that rawness. We may not like our self-limiting beliefs, but they become comfortable for this very reason, that they protect us from our own vulnerability. And then once we've cracked open that space where we are vulnerable, to really listen, to actively cultivate bringing in this Taurus polarity, a new reality, and being resourceful, discovering what we value and merging with that. And when we don't follow this process, we stop at this acceptance of a limiting belief as our perspective of truth. And we stay stuck in this perspective because we've accepted it. And likely our reality will continue to meet us and reinforce that limitation with self-fulfilling evidence. To move past cynicism and to engage in a reality that one actually likes or wants, one has to want something else. We have to consider that our life and our experience and our ability to feel pleasure in our reality is worth it enough to embark on the investigation of deeper meaning and personal expansion. This is again the Taurus polarity of Scorpio and self-esteem. And this means ceasing to let social or personal conditioning from the outside have power any longer. That maybe you've been told something your whole life that isn't true. And maybe it's part of your higher work to take that poison in, to metabolize it, and to find a new way. That in your process of changing what you've been given, transmuting lead to gold, you open up the possibility for other beings to do the same. And I want to look at the last two possible phases of this square aspect. If you know this kind of language, follow me. And if not, it's just a meditation, I guess, too. We have disseminating and last quarter. And when we have planets approaching last quarter, but aren't at 270 degrees yet, starting around 260, we are in the disseminating phase square, which is a crisis aspect, and I correlate it astrologically with the emotion of cynicism. And I'm going to pull from Ari Moshe's description of the disseminating square in his ebook, A Beginner's Guide to Evolutionary Astrology. And here he says, throughout the disseminating phase, a soul has become deeply immersed in society. This immersion initially took place by way of the soul learning to peer deeply into society and participating with it in such a way that allows maximum social interaction and participation. By the end of the disseminating phase, the soul has learned practically everything there is to learn about how society works. By the disseminating phase square, the soul is now preparing to break free from the trends and customs to which it has adapted. This will produce great insecurity for the soul, as it has become accustomed to the terms and conditions of the status quo. However, at this stage, the soul is only aware that this current position is outdated and that some sort of change needs to happen. So, do you feel the cynicism there with me? Knowing the ins and outs of something that needs to change, but not knowing what or how. This is really a place where people easily shut down. If we get past the 270 degree mark and enter the cardinal moment of the last quarter phase square, so this is just a few degrees of shift, we have this other aspect that Ari goes on to describe in this way. A crisis will occur at this point whereby the soul is psychologically drawn to reinvent and rediscover itself, and yet is still very unfamiliar with breaking free from the mold in such a way. Therefore, this aspect requires detachment and radicalization. The psychological process of a last quarter square is one wherein a soul progressively becomes familiar with who it is and how it can actualize its purpose in a way that reflects a more universal and non-conditioned state of awareness. The soul's awareness is naturally drawn toward collective social values that transcend cultural boundaries. Based on that, the soul has the potential to be very innovative and inspire new ways of thinking. Now, picture the emotion of cynicism as the disseminating phase. It's just a few degrees away from that shift. Before we become more inventive and imaginative, there's this natural experience and crisis even of dissecting deeply everything that has come before it. So before we imagine these more liberating ways of being and more idealistic ways of thinking, we dive into the depths of our cynicism, into the depths of any given wound, personal or collective. The Jupiter-Pluto square that we're experiencing, for example, was transitioning from disseminating to last quarter, and we had just elected Trump prior to the movement, where it switched from that disseminating cynicism aspect to the last quarter, let's be more imaginative aspect. So we're confronted with knowing that our current system is really flawed, and a lot of information is coming out right now about how and all the specifics, and people are really getting more engaged in looking at how it's flawed. And the new imaginative thinking is brewing, even if it seems like from a cynical point of view that we're kind of just headed nowhere to some disastrous place. My own experiences of transmuting parts of my life experience I don't like or have found painful has accelerated because of learning about the Scorpio archetype. And I hope I can act as a reminder that when we get stuck, life around us gets stuck too. We actually have to dig for more. And we have to lift up those rocks and see the creepy insects that come running out. We need transcendent or higher visions of what's possible to focus on. If we train our consciousness to always view our perception of circumstances that we don't like as the very cutting edge of personal growth and progress, and commit to that pursuit, we will very quickly lead adventurous and soulful lives. Additionally, we don't make the largest leaps in consciousness by simply combating what already exists and entering into that matrix. The gift of entering into a deeper relationship to one's own soul is that we start to see past the things outside of us that we've given ourselves away to, and we come back closer to home. We get to create something radically original from there. We can engage our imagination and inventiveness to picture new realities, which is the Aquarius square to Scorpio. And we engage spirit and higher self, intuition, the kind of Piscean qualities that form a natural trine to Scorpio, to resource ourselves with spirituality along the way of diving into the deep that Scorpio represents. And as I alluded to, it's not really enough to just pick apart what we don't like. We also have to have vision for something to work toward. And cynicism is a mechanism that stands at the threshold of this process that says, this is bad, and this is all there is, rather than this is bad, and I am specifically resourced to metabolize it and to change it by virtue of my ability to witness it. So I've come up with some questions that we can direct inwardly, or to share with others that are wanting to deepen into their kind of soul consciousness. And there are these. Who am I before and after this incarnation? The soul differs from the ego. The ego is more a vehicle for the soul. So why this ego that you have? What is its purpose for you? And one way to kind of see the relationship between the two is, do you ever have dreams of operating a vehicle? This symbolically correlates with how the soul is operating through the ego and can offer feedback on how you're navigating your path or not. So driving drunk can correspond with metaphorically being intoxicated as one goes through life, driven by some kind of delusion or driving in the passenger seat can symbolize one as being passive or allowing someone else to drive. Think of all the complex functions of living and thriving that come pretty naturally to you. Have you developed these in past lives? What things upset you more than they should? Who are you beyond what other people say you are or say you should be? What do you deeply desire? What are your fears? And what do you desire that you are also afraid of? And I've got more. This is the last one. How is this current incarnation and identity, name, family, schools you've attended, jobs you've had, just the tip of the iceberg of who you are? What catches your attention outside of you? What perceived externals spark you on the inside? What gemstones lie covered in the mysteries of your subconscious? Why did you incarnate into the body you have, the family you were born into, the circumstances you inherited? What are the tools and resources and processes you have to work with? And I want to note here that cultural conditioning of what's good and bad doesn't really apply here. Having bad circumstances doesn't mean one's soul is bad and being punished. This is a spiritual concept that correlates with the belief of a punishment-based karma or a punisher god. So the why answers are a lot more complex of a mystery to uncover. Cynicism is always an invitation to ask, why is this my limitation? And how do I liberate? Do I need to move towards something or away from something? And can I commit so deeply to myself as to walk this labyrinth of a path laid out before me and keep going as it twists and turns and changes, ever expanding in mystery and ever expanding in clarity? Or will I take comfort with where I'm at, even though I don't like it? This is what cynicism does, even though that's not necessarily a conscious intention. Cynicism is a protective mechanism, a defense from the vulnerability and unknown of being open to the dimension of soul, when to do so would mean to confront an immediate vacuum, an immediate sense of emptiness, an immediate unfulfilled desire. And so if we were to become more versed as a culture to view desire as the cutting edge of consciousness rather than something to avoid because it causes pain and lack-oriented thought, we would be able to move more quickly through our psycho-spiritual processes. When we apply the natural trine of Pisces to the Scorpionic process, applying radical faith to our process of transition and transmutation can allow us to be open to the love and spiritual support available to us. When we're jaded about the universe itself, the universe only mirrors back this limitation. When we have faith in the yet unseen forces at play in our lives, they begin to materialize into clarity and form. When we don't even consider that those unseen forces exist, we stay stuck in a material-based consciousness which can only comprehend that which already is. This is cynicism. And cynicism is a natural process, and I experience it a lot and continue to. It's simply the experience of disliking something and thinking that's just the way it's going to be. But I hope that in making a habit of recognizing that this is not how it has to be, we can accelerate the turnover time. Given that Scorpio naturally squares Aquarius and that we channel information in Aquarius, I would go so far as to say that cynicism literally blocks the consciousness from channeling imaginative thinking and rather allows the consciousness to continue channeling data on the complexities of the flaws of that which the consciousness is already jaded about. Studying this archetype of Scorpio has trained my mind to see that it's always a circular, cyclical process that we're going through. Cynicism is just a stop along the way of a greater storyline and happens to be like a jagged rock our pant leg gets stuck on as we walk through a canyon. We get stuck in place, yet all we have to do is unhook and keep going. The greater our resistance, or the greater the distance we have from the origin of the snare, the greater the drama that forms around it that seems to block it off, and the higher the gate that appears to keep us entrenched. Essentially, we make the choice to no longer feed the problems and the dramas that appear on the surface as though they're all that there is. And we attune our depth perception to the small, simple seeds below the surface that one day become the plants of our life circumstances that we seek to weed or to cultivate. So cynicism is a psychological trap at times, and at the same time a foretelling of that which has surfaced for conscious viewing and for our radical transformation, if we choose to walk that path. It doesn't really happen for us. We have to walk the path by choice, and the universe actually meets us at our efforts. The remedy for cynicism is faith and the cultivation of our imagination through the earth plane, the Taurus polarity to Scorpio. We bring in the Leo square too of vulnerability and imagination and play, the Aquarius square of channeling, and the proof eventually comes through the process. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was amazing. So beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
We have about...
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Questions, anyone?
Give us a moment to think.
Okay.
Sabrina, how does this play out in your life? I mean, are you a cynical person transmuting?
I feel emotionally triggered and pained when people tell me about problems that they don't think there's a solution to. I'm a total idealist at heart. I do sometimes, whenever I do experience cynicism, it hurts so much. It's this feeling of something not being possible. And I'm in 9th house Pluto in Scorpio, so that's like the worst, like a cutoff of possibility. So usually for me, if there's something that I don't believe is possible or something that just really hurts, it's usually a sign for me that there's a process that has to unfold. And it does take time to kind of find the answers. And it involves kind of getting help from outside of myself too. Like I can go really deep into meditation or soul space, like a self-awareness, but also it's kind of about this conscious merging with teachings, like things I read or videos I watch or talking to friends. But it's kind of making this personal choice that I don't want things to actually be that way. And I can feel the process of like, if I really believe that that's just the way it is, my reality seems to mirror that. And if I'm open to it being some other way, I start to, like, my imagination gets activated, or I talk to someone and they bring something up that's the answer that was what I needed.
That's awesome. Yeah, cynicism is like poison. It just, and especially correlating it with Scorpio, I can see how it would just kind of freeze you in place to where you feel like there's nothing you can do. You're just stuck.
Right. And I think that it gets hidden inside, or like it cloaks itself in this concept of realism. Like, oh, I'm just realistic. I just know how it is. This is how it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Sabrina, how do you cope with the fact of death?
Oh, that's so interesting. What do you mean specifically, or do you just mean broadly?
You're pretty young and you probably don't think about death like some of us oldies here. Like, we think of death every day. wake up and go, oh, right. This is very cynical thinking, and I can't seem to get past it. I mean, it's still there. And I guess you just have to die to get through it. So have you had any thoughts on this whole death process?
Yeah, it's so cool that you ask, because I'm in a lifespan psychology class, and we just did the death part of the curriculum this week. And I think that it comes to what we think the afterlife is, or what happens. For example, I used to worry about death being this kind of accidental thing. And that caused me anxiety, the thought that my life could get cut short for no good reason. But as time has gone on, I really think about it as that crossing the veil is a huge deal. And I don't think that it happens that lightly. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I just have this feeling that it is a difficult threshold to cross when it's not one's time. And so I feel like having a sense of peace with how life is going and being in the flow with life, one's death would come at a time that would be very natural for them. And I don't really think about death that much, as in the end of this life. But I do think about psychological death that occurs all the time. And, regularly can feel when parts of me have died, even things that I don't want anymore. There's still a grief process. So I think that the death of this body, or who we are in this incarnation, is it's such a final death for this entire ego that we are living out. But I also really believe in reincarnation. So there's that. Does that kind of...
Yes, thanks, Sabrina. I wonder if the Pluto and Scorpio generation have come to terms more with death, because, Pluto is the soul, and Scorpio as well. And I wonder if you're more in touch with your souls. It seems to me you are.
I think they're going to be the ones that will be showing us that it's not as dire as we think it is.
Yes. I just love hearing from you, Sabrina, and Wei and Timothy. You're all of the Pluto Scorpio generation, and I just love it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, this generation is really starting to speak up more. I think that we, certain ways that we've grown up, there's the whole power dynamic of our generation and feeling disempowered and discovering power. And I just if you look at the way that older generations talk about millennials in the media, and it's this weird bullying that happens, or we're told that we're somehow inept at coping with life, when really we just have a different psychology. And I think that it's so radical to wake up to having a soul. I kind of, experienced that in this life a few years ago, where it became apparent that the soul was a thing, where before it was just kind of this lofty concept or something that I heard artists talk about. But for it to be a real part of our reality, I think that it does so much, because the outside reality is always telling us how to get by and how to succeed based on doing these very external things, when there's these key internal switches that really bring a lot of change. And the Aquarius part to it is so interesting to me, because I remember when I first kind of got into this kind of soul awareness of myself, I had this feeling that I was causing things in my reality, which was probably troubling, ideas to have. But now I think of it more as synchronicity. And I see it on Facebook a lot, where I'm thinking about something, or I have a desire, like I want to know something, and then someone posts about it, and it's just like we're all so connected, and there's a deeper connection that happens when a person is kind of dropping into that space. Or I also have the experience of like I'll be thinking about one of the archetypes or doing something that is really inherent to an archetype, and someone whose Pluto is in that house of that archetype will text me at that very moment, like they could smell it or something. And it's just this like reality that's always unfolding, something happening in the undercurrents. And there is a way to also look at it and study it, and a lot of the teachings around it act as though we're not supposed to look at it. It's the Scorpio taboo, or like you're not supposed to talk about it. It exists, it's there, and people get mad if you talk about it, or they just, you know, don't want to go there. And part of what I like to do with astrology, and what I'm hoping to do more, is find ways to talk about it, the things that people don't want to talk about, in ways that's more maybe lighthearted or fun, just the Leo square, and make it more accessible somehow, because I think it's also really deeply validating, especially if you have really intense emotions and have a really intense experience of reality, but that's somehow seen as wrong or damaging when it's just like who you are. And I think that that will continue to get better over time as more this like Pluto and Scorpio people are talking about stuff. So yeah, that's a little tangent there. Any other thoughts?
Sabrina, I just wanted to say thank you so much. As a Scorpio South Node, I resonate so much with you guys. Like you were saying about being people not wanting to, when you bring up, you know, intense things and people just wanting to just completely shut you down, and you're like, but this is what's going on. So
Right.
yeah, I absolutely love you guys, and I try to stand up for you all when I hear the older generations, because it really pisses me off when they do that, you know, because you
Well,
guys are so just right there, you know.
thank you.
Yeah, and I can relate to your generation too, because I have a Scorpio North node.
Yeah.
And I have Saturn in Scorpio, so I'm with you.
Woo. Yeah, I mean, I think we all have the scorpionic part to our reality where we're really intense about something, and like scary to be that intense or something. So.
Do you think the age of Aquarius will bring more insight and revelation, because we're sort of at the end of the Pisces, which is a little bit sort of clouded, and we can't see that much really, but I wonder if in the age of Aquarius we will see much, much more. What do you think?
I think so. I think the whole fixed square, so like all of and if we want to access like the best potentials of the Aquarius archetype, we kind of work through all of the fixed signs. And so that playfulness with Leo, I think like learning how to have fun and really enjoy life makes transformation in Scorpio a lot easier. And Aquarius, like learning how to see things from a distance or becoming detached, helps us see the bigger picture, like helps us not be